In the headlines, Korea's rival political parties meet with the families of the April ferry disaster victims once again in search of a breakthrough in the political deadlock that's paralyzed Korea's legislative action for months. Has the currency environment of the strong Korean won and the weak yen brought a new landscape to the tourism industry? The sheer volume of Korean tourist spending overseas is expected to surpass that of Japanese for the first time this year. And thousands of pro-democracy protesters remain camped out on major highways in Hong Kong despite a police crackdown on Sunday that involved tear gas and pepper spray. Hello and welcome. Happy Monday, everyone. Coming to you live from Seoul, I am Kang Chery. Korea's rival political parties failed to make a breakthrough during today's trilateral meeting with the representatives for the families of victims of the April ferry disaster, crushing hopes for an end to the months-long political gridlock in the National Assembly. Our Ji Myung-kil has more.
The months-long parliamentary gridlock is showing no signs of easing. Floor leaders of the country's two main rival parties have been holding meetings throughout Monday, including a trilateral meeting with representatives of the bereaved families, but with no results. It is unclear whether the main opposition, New Politics Alliance for Democracy, will attend Tuesday's plenary session, which was adjourned last week by the Assembly Speaker. The ruling Central Party has said it will go ahead with legislating some 90 draft bills during the session and will not accept any more delays.
Yes, we will open Tuesday's plenary session, and it's the Assembly Speaker's authority.
Hopes were running high throughout the day as both rival parties conveyed their willingness to bring an end to the current parliamentary impasse. The main opposition party's interim chief, Moon Hee-sang, had asked for high-level talks with his ruling party counterpart, but has not received a response. The main opposition party plans to open a caucus of its party lawmakers Monday night to decide on whether to participate in Tuesday's plenary session and how to negotiate with the ruling party on fixing the upcoming parliamentary schedule, which includes government audits, an interpellation session, and next year's government budget. Ji Myung-kil, ARIRANG News.
In Korean society, there's always been a thin line between discipline and abuse when it comes to physical punishment. But whether thin or thick, crossing that line will now come with hefty sentence. Our Kwon-swa has more.
The Korean public was outraged earlier this year over a series of cases in which women physically abused their stepdaughters to death. Despite the severity of their actions, the two offenders were punished with 10 and 15 years in prison, respectively. The cases and others like them prompted the country to strengthen the laws against child abuse. Before the law was revised, people found guilty of abusive actions that resulted in the death of a child received a minimum of 3 years in prison with a possibility of suspended sentence. Under the new law, a convicted offender will get a minimum 5-year sentence and could face life in prison. A parent who physically harms their child could also have their parental rights deprived, and the punishments for child care workers who are found guilty of violent acts will be strengthened. Adults who suspect abuse will now be required by law to report their suspicions to police or relevant agencies. Those in positions of power, such as teachers and child care workers, will face fines of up to 5 million won, or roughly $4,800 for failing to do so. Child welfare experts welcome the changes, but say cooperation with related organizations will be necessary for them to be effective. They also point out that there is a lack of manpower at child protection centers in the nation. Kwon-swa, ARIRANG News.
The vice foreign ministers of South Korea and Japan will meet for talks later this week. Seoul's foreign ministry says Vice Minister Cho Tae-yong will travel to Tokyo this Wednesday for the 13th round of strategic dialogue. Cho and his Japanese counterpart Akitaka Saiki are set to address a range of pending bilateral issues, including North Korea. They're also expected to discuss the details of a possible summit between their leaders, which some speculate could take place in November on the sidelines of the APEC summit in Beijing. For this week's Industry Insight, we're going to talk about the next evolution in mobile technology. Global sales of smart watches, glasses, and fitness bands are expected to top $3 billion this year. But could they knock the smartphone off its perch? Here is our Connie Kim with more.
With many believing that the smartphone market is already reaching maturity, there's a new kid on the block: wearables. Currently in its infancy stage, the market value of wearables is forecast to more than double over the next 4 years. So what can consumers expect next? Take a look. Leave your smartphone in your pocket, and with a smartwatch on your wrist alone, you can make calls, send emails, monitor your health, and stay fit. That's what the future holds for us. That's if wearables really take off. It started with Google Glass. With a voice command, the miniature computer in the upper right corner vision will take pictures, record video and audio, and search for a location. Samsung, wanting to get out in front of Apple, came out with Galaxy Gear, although pretty prematurely, many would say. And the highly anticipated Apple Watch and LG G Watch R were unveiled earlier this month. But the question is, would you wear it every day? It may be fun to show off to your friends for a day or two, but it's currently a hard sell to non-techies. And that's where the fashion industry comes in. Google's partnered up with designer Diane von Furstenberg to offer a set of stylish frames and clip-on shades. Apple is working with Burberry and high-end watchmaker Tag Heuer in a move to go stylish. But fashion is only the start. The short battery life of wearables is another factor that could turn off consumers.
In order to become part of our daily lives, the battery life needs to be extended. Battery technology is currently catered to the auto industry. Bendable, flexible, and stretchable batteries that can fit into wearables need to be developed.
The small display screens are another issue in a world where size does matter. The solution may come in the form of holograms or virtual displays controlled by voice command.
Our interface will increasingly be voice as opposed to text, largely because you can speak to a wearable device and not be limited by the size of the keyboard. So that really is the future, I think.
From smartphones to now smartwatches and glasses, the technology is poised to be all around us in the near future, whether through smart homes, smart cars, or even smart shoes. Connie Kim, ARIRANG News.
For the latest in news that impacts Korea and the world, join Kang Chery for a lively half hour that covers politics, business, international news, and much more. Live at 8 every weeknight on ARIRANG TV.
Human Rights Council headquarters in Geneva on Thursday, finding ways to persuade. Traditionally, Japanese tourists tend to spend a lot more abroad compared to Korean travelers, given the sheer size of the population of the two countries. But as our Kim Ji-yeon reports, times are changing because of the new currency environment.
Apart from trade, the strengthening of the Korean won against the Japanese yen is affecting the spending habits of tourists. The amount of money spent by Koreans while traveling overseas is expected to surpass that of Japanese tourists for the first time this year. This means Japanese tourists are spending less in Korea, while Koreans are buying more goods and services in Japan. Koreans spent an all-time high of $21.7 billion overseas last year, after recording a steady increase since 2009. The amount spent by the Japanese tourists last year was just $100 million higher. The Korea Culture and Tourism Institute says Koreans are taking advantage of the falling value of the Japanese yen against the Korean won, making it relatively cheaper for Koreans to buy Japanese goods than before. The current exchange rate hovers at around 951 to 100 yen, the lowest it's been since 2008. Traditionally, expenditures from Japanese tourists have been higher than their Korean counterparts, which is understandable given that Japan's gross domestic product is 4 times higher than Korea's, and that its population is more than 2 times greater. So will this trend continue over the long term? An analyst from IM Investment and Securities doesn't think so.
The Bank of Korea is expected to lower the country's main benchmark rate in the coming months. This, coupled with Finance Minister Choi Kyung-hwan's expansionary policies, will help to lower the value of the Korean currency by the end of this year.
The Bank of Korea lowered its interest rate by 25 basis points in August, ending a 15-month freeze. Kim Ji-yeon, ARIRANG News.
And many Koreans opting to travel overseas for their summer vacations this past month was one of the reasons that's reduced the August current account surplus for Korea. The Bank of Korea says its preliminary data shows last month's surplus stood at nearly 7.3 billion US dollars, which is down nearly $600 million from the July figure. However, Korea continued posting a current account surplus for the 30th straight month in August. While more women are entering the workforce here in the country, the glass ceiling certainly remains very much intact. A new report from Credit Suisse shows that the proportion of female executives in Korea is slightly over 1%, the lowest among the 36 countries surveyed, and far behind Thailand, which topped the list at more than 26%. The report also points to Korea's gender pay gap, which is at 39%. The highest on the list. Thousands of delegates from more than 190 countries have converged on the Korean city of Pyeongchang for an international convention on biodiversity. Many issues to be discussed, among them living modified organism products, or LMOs. Shin Se-min tells us more.
Potatoes, corn, tomatoes, and beans, not so special, everyday produce. What you may not know is that you could be eating produce that comes with a twist in its genetic material. Living modified organisms, or LMOs as they are called, are living organisms that possess genetic material obtained through the use of modern biotechnology. In Korea last year, more than 8.8 million tons of LMO products were imported according to the Korea Biosafety Clearinghouse. These genetically engineered products like LMOs and GMOs may provide a possible solution to food shortages, but their effects on our ecosystems are not yet fully known. To raise awareness and create regulations for properly labeling LMO products and discuss issues related to biological diversity, nearly 20,000 delegates from over 190 nations have gathered in Pyeongchang, Gangwon-do Province. The executive secretary of the convention says many countries still have long ways to go in terms of securing our food safety as they don't properly mark LMO products.
Several countries still don't have legislation on labeling, but this is an issue that the protocol promotes, is so that shipments containing LMOs should be labeled accordingly. And if so, they need to have the necessary expertise to conduct such risk assessments.
The convention is also set to address a midterm evaluation on a 2011 to 2020 strategic plan for biodiversity, as well as adopting a Pyeongchang roadmap that helps to achieve UN Sustainable Development Goals. Among other agenda items, the building of a peace park inside a demilitarized zone will be a topic of discussion. Delegates will also discuss the feasibility of President Park Geun-hye's vision for the park, along with ways to get the North get engaged in its development. Shin Se-min, ARIRANG News, Pyeongchang.
A growing number of elderly Koreans appear to be breaking away from long-held beliefs about marriage, divorce, and death. A report by Statistics Korea says about 47% of those aged between 50 and 64 say they want to be cremated after death. That's nearly 3 times higher than the percentage of people who prefer to be buried, which used to be the norm. The age group, which includes the baby boomer generation, were also more progressive about marriage and divorce. More than 26% say that marriage was not a must, and about 10 percentage points higher than those aged 65 and above. Nearly 42% were also open to the idea of divorce, which is in contrast to 75% of their elders who said divorce was out of the question. Thousands of protesters have taken to the streets of Hong Kong, clashing with police in their fight for democracy. For more, Paul is joining us. Paul, this has escalated into the largest pro-democracy rally in Hong Kong since China took over the territory. What's the current situation on the ground?
Well, Hong Kong police say they fired tear gas 87 times since yesterday to disperse the large crowds, which had paralyzed the main financial district and shut down major roads across the city. The situation, however, has somewhat gotten under control, but the demonstrators have further dug themselves in and remain defiant of Beijing's authority. Our Kim Min-ji reports.
Thousands of protesters continue to occupy major streets in the heart of Hong Kong. The crowds have now somewhat thinned out, but many roads leading to the city's financial district remain blocked off as protesters ignore warnings from authorities who say the demonstrations are illegal. The Hong Kong Information Services Department says more than 36 people have been injured in clashes. Riot police have used tear gas and pepper spray on the protesters, many of whom wore goggles, ponchos, and held up umbrellas to protect themselves. Fresh protests have also broken out in the shopping district of Causeway Bay and in Mong Kok. Hong Kong's chief executive has called on citizens not to believe what he called rumors of police violence.
I hope citizens can keep their calm and not falsely believe in these rumors. The police are working hard to maintain social order, which includes the free flow of traffic. They are also protecting public safety and have exercised great restraint during their operations.
The Occupy Central movement on Sunday follows a week of student-led protests which are demanding universal suffrage in the city's chief executive election in 2017. The demonstrators want to be allowed to directly vote for top city officials rather than Beijing-vetted candidates. Kim Min-ji, ARIRANG News.
And turning to the Middle East, Paul, Afghanistan has sworn in its new president, marking the first democratic transfer of power in the country's history. But it looks like the celebrations have been somewhat muted, with reports of an explosion rocking the capital city there.
That's correct. Security forces in Kabul have been on high alert over the past few days, bracing for an attack such as this on the sidelines of Ashraf Ghani's inauguration ceremony. Police authorities said on Monday that a suicide bomber killed 4 civilians and injured 2 others near Kabul airport. The Taliban group has claimed responsibility for the explosion via an online statement, saying they were trying to target foreign and Afghan soldiers. Despite the eruption of violence, many Afghans said they hoped the new government would bring about peace and security to the country.
It's a big source of pride that today we see the democratic transfer of power from one president to another president for the first time ever in the history of our country. I urge the new president to work hard in bringing peace and security.
During his inaugural speech, President Ghani called on Taliban insurgents to join peace talks after fighting for 13 long years. The new leader is expected to sign a security agreement to allow some 12,000 U.S. troops to stay in Afghanistan until 2015. A move that the outgoing leader Hamid Karzai had strongly opposed.
And in the U.S., angry protests have flared up yet again in the town of Ferguson, demanding justice for the shooting death of an unarmed black teenager last month. What sparked this latest demonstration?
Well, it follows weeks of racially charged demonstrations. The local police chief issued a video apology to the parents of the late Michael Brown last week. But in response, Brown's mother said she doesn't want words but action. More than 150 protesters gathered near the Ferguson Police Department on Sunday to demand the resignation of the police chief as well as the arrest of Darren Wilson, the white officer who fatally shot Brown in broad daylight. The protests come as the authorities were seeking suspect in what appears to be unrelated shootings of 2 police officers in the area.
The officer was able to block it with his arm and then was shot in the arm by one of the suspects. The officer is in an area hospital. He's expected to survive. We have no indication right now that either suspect was shot. We certainly haven't developed any evidence that would lend itself to that. We are continuing the investigation right now.
Both officers sustained non-life-threatening injuries during the separate incidents on Saturday night. Meanwhile, a grand jury is expected to deliver a final decision on whether to indict Officer Wilson in November as the U.S. Justice Department conducts a broader investigation into the case.
And finally, switching gears a bit to the question, how close are we to achieving Harry Potter's invisibility cloak? I mean, scientists in the U.S. say they've made a breakthrough, marking a key step towards making this fantasy a reality. How does it work? Does it work?
Well, a team at the University of Rochester say they have bypassed high-tech materials to come up with a cloak or the ability to hide objects from sight while other surrounding objects remain undisturbed. The process is expected to significantly reduce the cost related to this optical illusion, potentially paving the way for relatively cheap mass production. The so-called Rochester cloak is said to be a series of 4 lenses lined up behind the necks to provide the first 3-dimensional and multi-directional cloaking. As for practical applications, Professor of Physics John Howell said the technology could be applied to a wide range of areas, and that includes helping surgeons by allowing them to look through their hands while operating on a patient. Chery?
All right. Thank you so much for those stories, Paul, and we'll see you back here in just about 2 hours.
Hello and welcome to your Asian Games update at this hour. And we start with the canoe sprint. The canoe and kayak singles and doubles and kayak 4 events finals all took place over at the Hanam Misari Canoe Kayak Center. And at the men's kayak single 200-meter race, South Korean Cho Kwang-hee set a blistering pace to win the country's first canoe gold medal in almost a quarter century. Meanwhile, measuring success by country, Kazakhstan added 5 golds, bolstering their spot at 4th in medals. China got 3, Uzbekistan 2, and Japan, along with South Korea, earned 1 as well. And speaking of gold, the South Korean doubles team of Ji Myung-kil and Jung Hyun beat out India's pair for the top finish. The Koreans were up 6-5 when they broke India's serve to take the first set. And it was 5-5 in the second set when a rain delay was called. But the match was restarted an hour later and the Korean duo ended up winning in straight sets. Now, South Korea last won men's doubles in 1986 with Kim Bong-soo and Yoo Jin-sun at net. And now over to the final day of beach volleyball. Kazakhstan put the spike down on China's attempt at a 3rd straight gold medal in the men's finals. Alexander Dyachenko and Alexei Sidorenko stunned the Chinese pair of Chen Cheng and Li Jian in straight sets, 21-15 and 21-10 for their nation's first ever gold in the sport. And finally, it was the last day of badminton as well. And world number 2 Chen Long and one of the greatest players of his generation, Lin Dan, went heads up in the all-China final. Now, Chen blew by Lin in the first frame 21-12, but the world champ came back to take the second set 21-15. And the momentum carried him through the final set 21-16, defending his spot as the Asian Games men's champion in badminton. And meanwhile, South Korea and North Korea are currently playing in the women's football semifinal, and freestyle wrestling wraps up with the men's 125-kilo division. Well, that's all I have for now. This has been Stephen Che. I leave you now with the medal standings. I'll see you later.
Hope your week is off to a great start, everyone. Welcome. Now, at the moment, we are getting light sprinkles in most regions, which has caused the mercury to drop, and more autumn showers are in store. 10 to 40 millimeters will fall along the eastern coast as well as down in Jeju through tomorrow afternoon. As for Tuesday, make sure to dress warmly as the rain will cool down temperatures, leading to some brisk morning air. And after tomorrow, sunny, cool weather is forecast before nationwide showers return on Thursday. Over in Incheon, a couple of matches were postponed today, including tennis due to the rain, but no worries of that happening tomorrow. That's your weather update on this Monday evening. I'll be back with more updates after 10. See you then.
And that will do it for this Monday edition of ARIRANG News at 8. Thanks for watching.